Hi everyone. So I haven't really posted much on my YouTube channel for years now, and there's a really good reason for that. Thanks to the pandemic, my whole life was turned upside down. I had to move things from my old workshop to a different workshop just to save some money, and then realized that the workshop was out of the perimeter when it came to lockdown, so I couldn't actually go to the workshop as much as I wanted to. Then finally, I had to move things again a year later to this workshop that you see right here. So hopefully this will be my last workshop and I never have to move again. I have a lot of room in this workshop, much more than my previous two workshops. But today, I want to talk about that right there. At the end of the video, I will open this up and show you exactly how it looks like today in 2025. So the first thing I did was to go to my workshop and try to look for what wood that I can use to make the actual hand tool cabinet. And I settled for a lot of southern yellow pine, which is the same wood I used for my mini workbench build. You can check out my channel for the full video on that, and also some additional plywood that I had lying around. And then began the long process of jointing and planing all the pieces of wood. And I mostly use my 2-in-1 jointer planer by Jet. So remember that a lot of the clips that I'm showing you here is actually pretty old, from 2020 during the COVID lockdowns, and I'm only producing this video now in 2025. So the jointer planer that you see here, the 2-in-1 Jet jointer planer, it kind of broke down sometime in 2021, so I no longer use this. But it was pretty useful for me to have at that time because it did both jointing and planing. And then once the pieces have been jointed and planed, and then I glue them together and clamp them up to get the thickness that I want, to get the size that I want for my hand tools cabinet. Having that jointer and planer actually helped me a lot. As you can see, there's not much of a seam here in the joint, in the pieces that I glued together. And then I have to measure it to final length, or sort of final length, and then get the pieces onto my table saw with an additional extension help, which you can't see in the camera because it's a long piece of wood. And then I proceeded to cut it down to final length. I did not have a miter saw at this point in time, so all I had was a table saw, and that's what I used. Next, I used a hand plane, a smoothing plane, actually a number 5 smoothing plane, to smoothen all the pieces of southern yellow pine. And some of the grain on this wood is really amazing. I must say that this is one of the most enjoyable process throughout this build. Of course, it took me a long time to learn how to sharpen the blades on my smoothing plane to the point where I can do this easily. So it's a long learning curve for me to get to this point in my woodworking journey. However, one of the problems I realized is that some of the pieces of this southern yellow pine had rot in it. It's a pretty old stock of southern yellow pine. So before thicknessing and before planing it down, I couldn't notice the defects, but now they are pretty obvious. So what I could do was actually use some resin to fill in the rot, to fill in the pieces that there were holes in it, there were cracks in some of those pieces. And I had to do this for a few pieces. I wouldn't say all of it. Some of the rot I had managed to cut it out before actually planing, but the planing process revealed even more rot. Now I had to do this process a few times because the resin seeped into the wood. Like I didn't really know that the wood can absorb that much of resin. Probably the rot was pretty extensive, I would say. So the first time I poured the resin, it wasn't even, and I had to do the process again and clean up again. All said and done, the rot looks pretty under control after I put the resin, and I think it actually makes it look a little bit more interesting, right? You can see the beautiful grain of the southern yellow pine, but just having that little defect made it a little bit more special. Then I proceeded to hand plane all the boards smooth, or as smooth as I can, to the final thickness. And as you'll see throughout this video, I had to actually alternate between two workshops. One was my main workshop and the other was my little home workshop with my mini workbench. So I had to alternate between using my table saw, and then when it was actually during one of the lockdowns, we had a total of 3 lockdowns in Malaysia, I had to use this whatever hand tools that I had available. Once all the pieces have been cut to the final dimensions, then started the process of creating the dovetails. Now this was the most nerve-wracking thing for me because this is the first time I'm actually attempting to create dovetails in an actual project. I've tried dovetails before just for fun and it was a disaster. So the second time I'm actually trying to create dovetails for a full project like this one. It's a huge project and I was really nervous. But I did manage to order some of cutting guides, magnetic cutting guides. The link you can find below this video. These guides are pretty popular, I would say. Similar ones are pretty popular on other YouTube videos as well. In fact, that's where I got the idea. So using the magnetic guide gave me the right angle and helped the blade stay in line with my marks and made the whole process a whole lot easier. I'm also not really good at chisel work, but this was a time when I was stuck at home again without access to my full workshop, without access to my power tools. So I had to get good using the chisels as fast as I can, right? Because this project I started to realize is going to take a pretty long time. And I just had to make do with whatever I have and whatever skills I already had. I was as careful as I could be while cutting the dovetails because the southern yellow pine is pretty old and it really cracks easily, especially at the edges. I had watched a lot of videos prior to doing this on how to actually create dovetails. Still, it was pretty difficult for me. Somehow I managed to get through creating most of the dovetails, and as you can see here, the fit isn't really the best in the world, and a lot of the wood, the southern yellow pine, actually was so fragile that it kept breaking. And so I kept on tweaking, shaving a little bit off with the chisels, and then some of the rod I actually had to use CA glue to make it harder, to make it more easier to work with. So this process took another 2 weeks or so, which added to the whole complete time to build this cabinet. But I finally got to the point where all the dovetails were done for the frame of the cabinet, the main frame of the cabinet, and also the doors. And then I just put it together and glued all the pieces up. One advantage of using dovetails is that I didn't really need clamps to clamp everything in place. However, I did put in all the pieces where it's supposed to be to make sure that the wood doesn't bend, and then use a little bit of clamp. It wasn't absolutely necessary, but remember, this is my first time doing dovetails. When the lockdown was lifted, I managed to sneak back to my workshop, and that's why I used my router table to create the grooves on the southern yellow pine so that the plywood would fit in perfectly. I'm missing a lot of clips here, but basically for the door I decided to use pieces of sapele, and these pieces were reused or refurbished from wooden flooring that I had purchased at a good price. I planed them down and then I used the hand plane to give them a real smooth, nice look. And I decided to use the shiplap concept to put these pieces together, as you will see later. Not all my cuts were accurate, so it's good to have a lot of hand tools available to actually get to the final dimensions and to make things fit a lot better. I'd also cut the shiplap pieces wrongly because one of the pieces actually needed the groove on the other side. I didn't do that, so I had cut a small piece of sapele and then tried to put it back where the additional piece of wood is supposed to be, because you can't have all the grooves created on the same side. That last piece needed to be different. And then it came time to put all the sapele shiplap pieces into the door, as you can see here, which was a really interesting process, and I think it came together really well. By this time I had purchased a few more clamps and I started to glue the pieces of the door panel together. I needed a lot of clamps for this, which is really good that I had to actually go out and purchase a few more clamps because I just didn't have enough clamps, or I didn't have enough clamps the right size for this kind of work. Next, I used glue to attach the frame to the panel, the door panel for my woodworking cabinet. And again, a lot of clamps was needed for this operation as well, but I'm really happy with the way the doors turned out. Next, I had cut some plywood and some smaller pieces of sapele, and this would act as internal pieces to hold hand planes and other hand tools. By this time, I think I had already spent an entire 2 months building my hand tools cabinet, but I was starting to get a little bit impatient, to be honest. So a lot of this work I planned to do it with dovetails as well, which I realized was just a bit too much work. So I chose the lazy option and just went with simple glue. I also had to make a lot of smaller pieces that is custom fit for the tools that I had, and also create my own dowels from sapele using a very nice dowel making jig that I had purchased from Amazon. I used hand tools again to create some holes for dowels just to strengthen the whole joint and the layout of the doors, as you can see here. And then I used a hand scraper to make the finished surface as smooth as I possibly could. I used the same hand scraper for the entire door, and then I used Danish oil for the entire cabinet. And it was so amazing to see the true colors of the sapele wood come out as I started applying Danish oil on it. I applied at least 2 coats of Danish oil. As I started to plan the placement of most of my hand tools, I realized that I had to create a few other pieces as well to make sure that the tools are secure in place and so that they don't wobble around whenever I open the doors. Next, I screwed on all the holders into place according to what I had initially planned, making sure to leave some room for future tools because I didn't have that many hand tools, as you can see, and I just wanted to not make this too short-sighted, right? Like I might have other tools in the future, so whatever tools I did have, I planned for it, but I also left parts of the inner door empty. To keep some of the tools from rattling around, I had to use magnets, and I had to build a little small holders for those magnets and measure them according to the dimensions of the tool itself. I measured the hinges, and then I used a chisel to chisel out some wood, and as well as a router plane to get it to the final dimensions, and then I screwed the hinges in place. One of the hardest things I had to do was to mount the hand tools cabinet on the wall, and luckily, since I used the Mike Pekovich method, this was easy to do because I had basically just needed to mount the back, and using sort of a French cleat method for this plywood, I just had to then carry the already assembled main body of my hand tools cabinet and then just place it right there. Finally, I used the Danish oil again on all the other small pieces that I created, and the whole project started to really look really good. I have never done anything this extensive since this project, and I think this is one of my best achievements so far. As a final touch, I added some really strong magnets to the door to make sure that they stay closed. I hope you enjoyed that. So now let's open up the tools cabinet, and I'm going to show you some of the additional stuff that I put in here that made more sense later on. And also it's going to be pretty messy inside, just fair warning. This tools cabinet, hand tools cabinet, has served me really well. I've moved it across 2 different workshops now, and it's pretty easy to disassemble and remount again, simply because the way the plywood French cleat back is designed. It makes it easy to mount this cabinet by myself, and I just had to remove the doors and put in the doors again, because the doors are really actually the heavier part of this cabinet. The door panel using sapili, although it looks nice, it added a lot of additional weight to the doors itself. The first thing is the dovetails. I think they have held up really well and they look good. I had to do a lot of fixing, a lot of filling on a lot of these dovetails. Some of them were actually pretty decent, others were really horrible, and they kind of broke apart. I had to glue back some of the dovetails and then do the fitting again, and then fill up the gaps with sawdust and glue. But you know, you can't really tell. I mean, it looks like dovetails. Now on the left, the first thing is you'll see all the measuring tools in one of the inner doors there. Now when you open this door, mostly it's going to be a lot of my mallets, my hammers and other tools that you hit stuff with. Then right below that, I have a complete section here for all my Stanley Sweetheart chisels. These are the main chisels I use. But inside the door, I also have an additional holder for some additional chisels that I made. And I made the handles myself. Now the middle part here is reserved for all my hand planes. And I don't have as many hand planes as I thought I would by this time. But I did buy this amazing Veritas hand plane, which is so good. So there's going to be a lot of empty room here. I might put some other tools here because I don't see myself having too many hand planes. There's a lot more empty space on this cabinet that I haven't really made drawers for. I just sort of place stuff into all of the empty spaces here, and probably this year I might get to improving on this cabinet a little bit by adding some drawers or some drawers. And behind this door are all my hand saws, and I had actually built this special holder at an angle so that I can put all the saws in place. And then I have a few other rasps here as well. If you notice, the handles on these rasps are unique. That's because I made these handles myself. A few more saws, which I actually don't really use much. I mean, I put it here thinking that I'm going to do a lot of dovetailing. As you can see, I have a lathe machine, and so I think what I'm going to use this hand tools cabinet is I'm going to put in a lot more of my wood turning tools. Although I already have a lot of the tools with special holders, as you can see here. Okay, so let's zoom out again, and this is how my hand tools cabinet looks like in all its glory. I can't believe that it's been 4 years since I built this hand tools cabinet. So it's 2025 now, and I think now that I'm settled into this new workshop, I am going to try to do as much as I can to learn new skills for my woodworking. And the centerpiece of all this is that hand tools cabinet that I built myself 4 years ago. That's all. Thank you for watching.